Nobody in Abigail's village expected the wedding day to begin with tears. The first light of morning had barely touched the fields when women started gathering at Sarah's family home. Fresh bread was cooling on wooden tables. The smell of cinnamon and warm butter drifted through the air. Outside, horses pulled simple black buggies into the yard one after another. Children laughed as they chased each other between the apple trees, unaware that only a few feet away, someone's entire world was falling apart. Inside the upstairs bedroom, 22-year-old Sarah sat perfectly still. Her wedding dress was spread across her lap, carefully stitched by her mother, her sisters, and her aunts over many weeks. It was beautiful in its simplicity, white, modest. Exactly the kind of dress every Amish bride dreamed of wearing. But Sarah couldn't even bring herself to look at it. Her hands wouldn't stop trembling. She slowly rested one hand against her stomach. The movement was so gentle that anyone watching might have missed it. Then came the tears. Not loud sobs, just silent tears that rolled down her face one after another. "I can't do this," she whispered. The bedroom door opened quietly. Abigail stepped inside. She didn't ask permission, she didn't need to. They'd been friends since they were 5 years old. They'd shared secrets, dreams, heartbreaks, and prayers. Abigail knew Sarah better than anyone else in the village. One look was enough. She crossed the room and sat beside her friend without saying a word. For nearly a minute, neither of them spoke. Sometimes silence says more than words ever can. Finally, Abigail reached over and gently held Sarah's hand. "You didn't sleep again, did you?" Sarah shook her head. "I close my eyes, and I see tomorrow turning into a nightmare." Abigail lowered her voice. "You still have time." Sarah already knew what she meant. "You can tell Daniel." Sarah's breathing became heavier. "And lose everything?" Abigail didn't answer, because she honestly didn't know what would happen. Daniel was respected by everyone. He worked harder than any young man in the village. He never raised his voice. He never spoke badly about anyone. If a fence needed fixing, Daniel was there. If an elderly neighbor needed firewood, Daniel showed up before sunrise. People often said that if kindness had a face, it would probably look like Daniel. But kindness has limits, doesn't it? Sarah had asked herself that question every single day for almost 4 months. She stood and walked toward the tiny bedroom window. Outside she could already see guests arriving. Families smiled. Children waved. Everything looked so peaceful. If only they knew. If only they knew that beneath her loose wedding dress, she was carrying another man's child. The thought made her knees weak. Abigail quickly stood beside her before she could fall. "I wish we could go back," Sarah whispered. "So do I. Back before the lies. Back before Jacob." Just hearing his name inside her own mind felt like a knife twisting deeper. It had all started during last autumn's harvest. Workers from nearby towns often came to help local farmers. Most stayed only a few weeks before moving on. Jacob was one of them. He wasn't Amish. He dressed differently. He spoke differently. Everything about him felt exciting to someone who'd spent her whole life inside one quiet community. The first time they met, Sarah accidentally dropped a basket of apples near the edge of a field. Before she could pick them up, Jacob rushed over. "I've got them," he'd said with a warm smile. It seemed like such a small moment. Looking back, it changed everything. Over the next several weeks, they crossed paths again and again. Sometimes near the fields, sometimes along the old dirt road leading toward town. Each conversation became a little longer. Each smile lasted a little more. Jacob asked questions no one else ever asked. "What do you dream about? If you could see the whole world, where would you go? What kind of life do you really want?" No one had ever spoken to Sarah like that. She found herself waiting for those conversations, then hoping for them, then needing them. One evening they sat beneath a giant oak tree, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and gold. Jacob reached for her hand. She should have pulled away. She knew that. Instead, she let him hold it. From that day forward, everything changed. They met in secret, never inside the village, always far enough away that no one would recognize them. At first they only talked. Then came promises. I love you. I'll come back for you. We'll build a life together. Sarah believed every single word, because that's what people do when they're deeply in love. They trust. Even when they shouldn't. Weeks passed. Winter slowly arrived. Then one morning, Jacob didn't come. Sarah waited beneath the old oak tree until sunset. The next day she returned. Nothing. A week later, still nothing. Every excuse she made for him slowly disappeared. Maybe he was sick. Maybe he'd been delayed. Maybe he'd written a letter that never arrived. Deep down, she already knew the truth. He wasn't coming back. But the worst part hadn't happened yet. A few weeks later, Sarah woke before sunrise feeling strangely ill. At first, she blamed the cold weather. Then the sickness returned. Again and again. One evening, Abigail quietly asked the question Sarah had been too afraid to ask herself. Sarah, when was the last time? Sarah's face turned pale. Neither of them spoke another word. Because in that moment, both of them already knew. Sarah couldn't breathe. The room suddenly felt smaller. The walls seemed to close around her as Abigail quietly stepped forward and wrapped her arms around her friend. For a long time, Sarah didn't cry. She simply stood there, frozen. Then the tears came all at once. I've ruined everything, she whispered. Abigail gently pulled her toward the bed. No, she said softly, you made a mistake. Those aren't the same thing. Sarah looked up. You don't understand. I do. No, if anyone finds out, my parents will never look at me the same way again. They love you. They'll be ashamed. The words hung heavily between them, outside. Life continued as though nothing had changed. A horse pulled a wagon past the house. Someone laughed. Children were playing somewhere in the distance. The world hadn't stopped. Only Sarah's had. Over the following days, Abigail stayed close to her whenever she could. She never asked questions. She never judged. Sometimes the greatest kindness isn't having the perfect words. It's simply refusing to walk away. Weeks passed. Sarah tried to convince herself there had been some mistake. Maybe the sickness would disappear. Maybe everything would somehow return to normal. But it didn't. Every morning the truth became harder to ignore. One evening, Abigail quietly brought her an old calendar. She placed it on the kitchen table. Neither of them spoke. Sarah counted the weeks. Then counted again. Her hands began shaking. It's true. Abigail slowly nodded. Sarah covered her face. I don't know what to do. That night she prayed longer than she ever had before. Not for herself, for forgiveness. For another chance, for a miracle. It came. Winter settled over the village. Snow covered the fields in a blanket of white, hiding every path beneath it. Sarah often wondered if life could do the same. Could her secret disappear beneath silence? Could yesterday simply be buried? The answer came sooner than she expected. One Sunday after worship, Daniel asked if he could walk with her. He had always admired Sarah from a distance, not because she was the prettiest girl in the village, but because she noticed people others ignored. She helped elderly neighbors without being asked. She stayed behind after community meals to wash dishes while everyone else talked. Daniel had seen those little things. To him, they mattered. As they walked along the snowy road, neither spoke for several minutes. Finally, Daniel smiled. I've been wanting to ask you something. Sarah felt her heartbeat quicken. He stopped beside an old maple tree. I've spoken with your father. She looked at him. I'd like to begin courting you, if you'll allow it. Time seemed to stop. Sarah's first instinct was to say no. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Daniel misunderstood her silence. If your answer is no, I'll respect it. No. The word escaped before she could think. Daniel looked surprised. No? Sarah quickly corrected herself. I mean, yes. For the first time in weeks. Daniel smiled from the heart. He thanked her quietly. Then they walked back toward the village together. Sarah smiled too, but inside, she felt completely broken. That evening, Abigail found her sitting alone in the barn. You said yes. I know. Why? Sarah stared into the darkness. Because I'm afraid. Afraid of what? Everything. She admitted something she'd been hiding even from herself. If I tell him now, he'll leave. And if you don't? Sarah closed her eyes. I'll lose him later. Neither choice felt possible. The weeks of courtship passed gently. Daniel treated Sarah with kindness and patience. He never rushed her, never demanded anything. If she seemed quiet, he simply sat beside her. If she looked tired, he carried the heavier work himself. Each act of kindness only made Sarah's guilt grow. More than once she decided she would tell him. She even rehearsed the words. Daniel, before we marry, there's something you deserve to know. But whenever she imagined the disappointment in his eyes, the courage disappeared. Spring finally arrived. The snow melted, flowers returned to the fields, and with them, wedding preparations began. Sarah's mother happily stitched the wedding dress. Her sisters laughed as they planned the celebration. Neighbors offered food, tables, and decorations. Everyone believed they were preparing for the happiest day of Sarah's life. Only two people knew the truth, Sarah and Abigail. A few days before the wedding, Abigail asked one final time, Please tell him. Sarah looked toward the setting sun. I've waited too long. It's never too late. Abigail didn't answer, because for the first time, she wasn't sure. The night before the wedding, Sarah barely slept. Every sound outside made her jump. Every prayer ended the same way. God, please don't let this secret destroy someone else's life. Morning came far too quickly. The wedding day had arrived. Guests filled the yard. Fresh bread pies and homemade jam covered long wooden tables. The men greeted one another warmly. Children chased butterflies through the grass. Everything looked perfect, but Sarah knew something nobody else's did. Secrets have a way of finding daylight, and before this wedding day was over, someone unexpected would speak the words that changed every life in the village forever. Sarah stood just outside the barn, her hands trembling beneath the sleeves of her wedding dress. Around her, guests smiled. Children laughed, and the sounds of quiet conversation drifted across the yard. To everyone else, it looked like the beginning of a beautiful day. To Sarah, it felt like the beginning of the end. Abigail gently squeezed her hand. You don't have to keep carrying this alone. Sarah forced a weak smile. It's too late. Before Abigail could answer, Sarah's mother stepped outside. There you are, she said warmly. Everyone's waiting. Sarah nodded, but her feet refused to move. Every step toward the ceremony felt heavier than the last. Inside the barn, wooden benches were filled with family, friends, and neighbors. Sunlight slipped through the narrow windows, covering the room with a soft golden glow. Daniel was already standing at the front. The moment he saw Sarah, his face lit up with the same quiet smile that had made her fall in love with him. That smile broke her heart. She lowered her eyes. I don't deserve this, she whispered to herself. The ceremony began. The bishop spoke about faith, about honesty, about the promises made before God. Every word struck Sarah like a stone. She could barely hear anything else. Her heartbeat drowned out the room. Then came the vows. Daniel looked directly into her eyes. I promise to stand beside you in joy and sorrow, in seasons of plenty and seasons of hardship. Sarah felt tears filling her eyes. She couldn't speak. The room grew silent. Everyone waited. Daniel leaned slightly closer. It's all right, he whispered. Take your time. His kindness made everything even harder. She opened her mouth. Instead of repeating the vows, different words came out. I have to tell you something. The entire barn became silent. Even the children stopped whispering. Sarah turned toward the gathered families. I'm sorry. Her voice shook. I've lied to all of you. Her mother looked confused. Her father slowly stood. Daniel remained still. Sarah took one deep breath. I'm carrying a child. Silence. No one moved. No one spoke. The only sound was the wind outside the barn. Then she forced herself to finish. The child isn't Daniel's. A woman in the back covered her mouth. Someone quietly gasped. Sarah closed her eyes, unable to look at anyone. I should have told you before today. I was afraid. I kept hoping I'd find the courage. I never did. Tears rolled freely down her face. I'm so sorry. She expected shouting. She expected anger. She expected Daniel to walk away. Nothing instead. For several long seconds, Daniel simply stood there. His eyes never left Sarah. Finally, he spoke. Only one sentence. Is there anything else you haven't told me? Sarah slowly shook her head. No. Daniel looked down at the wooden floor. Everyone watched him. No one dared interrupt. Even the bishop remained silent. Daniel took a slow breath, then another. He looked towards Sarah's parents. Their faces were filled with heartbreak. He looked toward Abigail. She couldn't hide the tears in her eyes. Finally, he stepped closer to Sarah, so close that only she could hear his next words. You should have trusted me. Sarah broke down crying. I know. I'm sorry. I was terrified. Daniel nodded slowly. I believe you. Those 4 words surprised everyone, but he wasn't finished. He turned to face the entire gathering. Then he spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. She made a mistake. She admitted it herself. Today she told the truth when it would have been easier to stay silent. He paused. I won't pretend this doesn't hurt. It does. It hurts more than I can explain. He swallowed hard, but pain doesn't erase compassion. The room remained completely silent. Daniel looked back at Sarah. I need time. I need honesty. And I need us to begin with truth instead of fear. Sarah could barely breathe. She had expected rejection. Instead, she saw mercy. Not because Daniel wasn't hurting, but because he refused to let anger make his decision for him. Across the room, Abigail quietly wiped away her tears. She realized something in that moment. Sometimes the strongest people aren't the ones who never get hurt. They're the ones who refuse to let hurt become hatred. No one left their seat. The silence inside the barn felt heavier than anything Sarah had ever known. Daniel stood still for a few moments as if he were carrying the weight of 2 futures at once. One path was easy. Walk away. Protect his pride. Let everyone tell him he had done the right thing. The other path, that one would ask more of him than he had ever imagined. The bishop finally spoke. Daniel, no one will judge you for whatever decision you make. Daniel nodded respectfully. I know. He looked at Sarah again. She wasn't even trying to defend herself anymore. She wasn't making excuses. She wasn't blaming Jacob. She wasn't asking for sympathy. She simply stood there, broken by the truth she had hidden for so long. Daniel realized something. The punishment had already begun long before today. She had been living with it every single day. He slowly walked toward the open barn door. Some whispered that the wedding was over. Others believed he would never come back. Sarah couldn't stop crying. She quietly removed the small flowers from her dress. This is over, she whispered. Abigail wrapped an arm around her shoulders. You don't know that. I do. Outside, Daniel walked alone through the fields. The wind moved gently through the tall grass. He remembered every conversation he had shared with Sarah, every smile, every dream, every plan they had made together. Then he remembered something his late father used to tell him. Mercy isn't tested when life is easy. It's tested when your heart is hurting. Daniel closed his eyes. He knew he had every reason to leave. But he also knew something else. If a person could never be forgiven after admitting the truth, then what was forgiveness really worth? Nearly 20 minutes passed. Inside the barn, people had begun quietly gathering their belongings. Sarah's father walked toward Daniel's family. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice shaking. "I should have known my daughter was suffering." Daniel's mother gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "This isn't your burden alone." Just then, the sound of footsteps echoed outside. Every head turned. Daniel had returned. He walked slowly back into the barn. No anger, no shouting, only quiet determination. He stopped in front of Sarah. She couldn't even look at him. "I won't pretend today didn't change everything," he said. "It did. Our marriage can't begin the way we planned." Sarah nodded through her tears. "I understand, but..." The entire room waited. "I don't believe one mistake should decide the rest of someone's life." Sarah looked up for the first time. Daniel continued, "If you're willing to spend the rest of your life being honest with me, I'll spend the rest of mine learning how to forgive." Sarah broke down completely. "I don't deserve that." "Maybe not," Daniel answered gently. "But none of us deserve every kindness we've been given." There wasn't a dry eye in the barn. Even the bishop quietly wiped away a tear. Daniel reached for Sarah's trembling hands. This child didn't choose how they came into this world. They shouldn't grow up carrying someone else's shame. Sarah covered her mouth, overwhelmed. Daniel smiled sadly. "If we move forward, I'll raise this child with you." Gasps filled the room. No one had expected those words. Not Abigail, not Sarah's parents, not even Daniel's own family. Abigail smiled through tears. At that moment she understood why people respected Daniel so deeply. His strength had never come from his hands. It came from his heart. Months later, life wasn't perfect. Some people in the village still whispered. Others questioned Daniel's decision. A few even called him foolish. Daniel never argued. He simply kept living, kept working, kept showing kindness. Little by little, the whispers became quieter. Then, one autumn morning, Sarah gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Daniel was the first person to hold him. The tiny child wrapped his fingers around Daniel's thumb. Daniel smiled. "Welcome home, little one." Sarah watched from the bed, tears running down her face. Not tears of fear this time, tears of gratitude. Years passed. The boy grew up believing Daniel was his father. Not because they shared the same blood, but because they shared something even stronger, love. One evening, many years later, the little boy asked Daniel, "Dad, why do people always say you're the kindest man in the village?" Daniel smiled. "They're probably talking about someone else." The boy laughed. "No, they're talking about you." Daniel looked across the yard where Sarah was hanging freshly washed clothes under the evening sky. "I've made mistakes too," he said quietly. "The difference is, someone once showed me grace, and I decided never to forget what that felt like." Sarah heard those words from across the yard. Their eyes met. Neither of them said anything. They didn't have to. Some stories don't end because the pain disappears. They end because love becomes stronger than the pain. If there's one thing this story reminds us, it's this. People are more than the worst mistake they've ever made. Honesty may come late, but it's still better than a lifetime of lies. And forgiveness isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the strongest choice a person can make. If this story stayed with you after hearing it, if it made you stop and think about grace, second chances, or the quiet strength it takes to forgive, then that's exactly why this story was told. Thank you for listening. And if you'd like to hear more emotional, fictional stories like this one, subscribe to Abigail Unbound and join us again for the next journey. Sometimes, the stories that touch us the most are the ones that remind us what it truly means to be human.